This is the Global News Podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Valerie Sanderson, and at 14 hours GMT on Thursday the 3rd of January, these are our main stories. China has become the first country to land a probe on the far side of the moon as it attempts to become a major space power. 11 people have gone on trial in Saudi Arabia, accused of being involved in the murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who was killed in the kingdom's consulate in Istanbul. South Korea says North Korea's ambassador to Italy has gone into hiding with his wife. Also in this podcast,
we have an awful lot of chemicals that travel in our blood that then cross the barrier into the lungs when exhaled in the breath. So if you can capture those, then you can detect signals for cancer cells that are growing abnormally.
We hear more about a new breath test that could revolutionise cancer diagnosis. China has become the first nation to land a spacecraft on the far side of the moon, handing Beijing both a scientific and a publicity coup. The country's space agency said the achievement opened a new chapter in lunar exploration. Here's the chief designer of the probe, Sun Zhezhou.
The whole process was as expected. The result was pretty precise, and the landing was very stable. The current landing location is our most ideal landing place. In other words, we're right on target.
The probe, named Chang'e 4, will carry out experiments on the moon's surface. It's already beamed back images. The landing is a propaganda victory for the Chinese leader Xi Jinping. The People's Daily, the mouthpiece of the ruling Communist Party, tweeted the words, "Go China." The US space agency NASA described it as an impressive accomplishment. Previous spacecraft have seen the far side of the moon, but none has landed on it. The Apollo 8 mission, back in 1968, was the first to see this side as it prepared to return to Earth. Here's an extract from a NASA documentary.
All systems are go, Apollo 8. Thank you.
For the final time, Apollo 8 passed behind the moon, out of contact with Earth, for this most critical of all the burns. On the ground, men waited.
Apollo 8, Houston. Apollo 8, Houston. Apollo 8, Houston. Apollo 8, Houston. Apollo 8, over. Oh, Apollo 8. Loud and clear.
Roger. Please be informed there is a Santa Claus.
That's affirmative. You're the best ones to know.
3 very tired astronauts were on their way home.
Well, I heard more about today's mission from our science editor, David Shukman.
It's a fascinating glimpse of a really unexplored part of the moon. It's an extraordinary thought that America and Russia have been sending missions, different kinds, unmanned and manned, to the moon for decades, but we don't know much about the far side of the moon. And here we are suddenly talking about a new mission on its surface. It's a great technical achievement by the Chinese because the far side of the moon has long been known to be much rougher than the side that we see, far less smoothed out. So landing a frail spacecraft in a much more rugged landscape is always going to be a challenge. But they've pulled it off, and with a very interesting and important element to this whole strategy, by having a relay satellite previously positioned in space with a view of the far side of the moon and of Earth, so that when the lander touched down, it was immediately able to be in constant contact with Earth, with the ground control. So it's a 2 spacecraft mission working in concert, which actually emphasizes how technically well the Chinese have done in this particular project.
And what did they want to find out from this mission?
Well, there's a fascinating debate about Chinese ambitions here, but we do know they've got a series of these Chang'e spacecraft planned in the coming years. They're very interested in exploring this far side of the moon to understand its mineral composition, in particular the water ice that's been confirmed to exist, locked in the rocks of the moon's surface. Now, the significance of water ice there is if you could ever exploit it, you would then have a chance of developing maybe a moon base for humans to exist on the surface of the moon. This is a longer-term ambition. But there are all kinds of tantalizing hints about Chinese interest in the moon. And a few years ago, I was in Beijing and had the rare privilege of interviewing a senior space scientist who talked about the plan to mine the moon for rare minerals, looking at the moon not in a way that we might, as a sort of gorgeous object in the night sky, but as a potential resource for growing industry, which I thought was a fascinating insight.
David Schuchman. A court in Saudi Arabia has begun the trial of 11 people allegedly involved in the murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The prosecutor has asked for the death sentence for 5 of the accused. Mr Khashoggi was killed when he visited the kingdom's consulate in Istanbul in October. The killing sparked international outrage and has led to unprecedented criticism of the kingdom, even from some of its closest Western allies. More details from our security correspondent, Frank Gardner.
In the Saudi capital Riyadh, the opening hearing has been held in what promises to be one of the kingdom's highest-profile trials. 11 men have been accused of being involved with the murder of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul 3 months ago. They have not been named, but the prosecution is calling for the death penalty for 5 of them. The Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, whom Western intelligence agencies suspect ordered the operation to silence one of his biggest critics, is not amongst those accused, and Saudi Arabia has denied his involvement. The defendants had their lawyers present during the hearing, and they've been granted more time to study the indictment against them. Saudi trials have been heavily criticised by human rights organisations for being opaque and handing out arbitrary punishments at the whim of the judge. But given the publicity surrounding the Khashoggi murder, this case is likely to be closely followed.
Frank Gardner. A senior North Korean diplomat in Italy is reportedly seeking asylum in a third country. South Korea's spy agency has confirmed that Jo Song-gil, the North's deputy ambassador in Rome, has disappeared. Our correspondent in Seoul, Laura Bicker, told me more about what's known of the whereabouts of Jo Song-gil.
Here in Seoul, there was a briefing by National Intelligence Services to congressmen. They, in turn, have told the media that what we know is that Jo Song-gil disappeared late November. He was last seen leaving the North Korean embassy, and certainly officials here in Seoul have not heard from him since. Italian officials say they have no record of a North Korean ambassador asking for asylum. So the big question is, where is Jo Song-gil? If indeed it comes amid the report, certainly here in Seoul, that he is seeking asylum, it certainly would be an embarrassment for Pyongyang, who take a very dim view of high-profile defectors.
And he is very well connected, isn't he?
His father was a diplomat, as was his father-in-law. We're hearing certainly from the defector Tae Yong-ho, who was the last high-profile defector. He was the deputy ambassador in London. He defected in 2016. He's given an interview to South Korean television where he says that Jo was the son of an ambassador and the son-in-law of a high-ranking ambassador who was in Thailand and in Hong Kong. So that indeed would be an embarrassment for his family. When it comes to these defections, it's very, very difficult to get the facts. Also, we hear from defectors that it can be dangerous for their families still living in North Korea when these reports come to light. I think another interesting thing that Tae Yong-ho said to the South Korean TV channel, he said that Jo was part of an effort to get luxury goods into North Korea. Obviously, these are the claims of a former North Korean defector, so there's no way of verifying it. He also said that Jo may have information about Pyongyang's nuclear plans. This is the kind of information that intelligence services in the United States and South Korea would love to get their hands on.
Laura Bicker in South Korea. Researchers in Britain are testing a new breathalyzer which could allow the earlier detection of cancer. It's designed to find signals for cancer cells in molecules exhaled by patients. Scientists are hoping this will lead to a cheap and easy method of spotting cancer at an early stage when the disease responds better to treatment. The 2-year trial involves 1,500 people. John Humphreys spoke to Professor Rebecca Fitzgerald, who's leading the research at Cancer Research UK's centre in Cambridge. But he first spoke to a patient, Rebecca Coldrick, who's taking part in the trial and suffers from a condition affecting her gullet or food pipe.
Well, I've got Barrett's esophagus and I've had it for about 20 years.
That's a sort of pre-cancerous condition, is it?
Yeah. And so they asked me to take part in a trial and I have done.
And what did you do?
I had a face mask over my mouth and it took a sample of my breath for about 15 minutes.
Right.
And normally you have to have an endoscopy.
Yeah, which is pretty unpleasant.
Yes, yeah. I have to have that every 2 years.
Right, and that was it. They took your breath, they captured it through the face mask, and that was it?
Yes.
You went home again?
Yes, very simple.
And what, may I ask, was the result?
I don't know yet. But
Right, so how long will it take for you to get the result back?
Well, I don't know if I will get results because it's a research trial. So,
I see.
But
well, actually, that's a question that I should put to Professor Fitzgerald, isn't it? What will happen now to Ms. Coldrick's test?
This new technology is able to detect thousands of chemicals that are released in the breath. These cross the lung barrier, so they're circulating normally in your blood. And because cancer cells are metabolizing abnormally, growing abnormally, they release different sorts of chemical signatures. So in this study, what we want to do is see if we can detect different sorts of signatures from different cancers. We want to develop, if you like, a sort of pan-cancer breath test. So we'll be seeing in Ms. Coldrick's breath whether we can detect specific signatures from Barrett's esophagus, the pre-cancer of esophageal cancer, see if it's sensitive enough to detect those changes and see if that signature looks different to someone who's got the warning signs or risk for, say, kidney cancer or pancreas cancer.
Right, I see. So at this stage, Ms. Coldrick wouldn't be told what the test results were, because this is just part of an ongoing experiment.
It is. It's an exploratory study, but we absolutely depend on patients like this to help us really. You can't do these experiments in a lab. We need patients with different sorts of risk, precancerous risk symptoms, healthy volunteers, to really see if we can capture different signatures for different cancers, which could be a real revolution for early detection of cancer. And the new technology means that we can detect chemical signals down to part per billion.
Part per billion?
So super sensitive.
So what would it tell you then? Let's assume you do detect certain changes. Will it say to you, this person therefore has cancer of some sort? Or what kind of information will you get?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. So we're hoping that the signals will not only just tell you there's a cancer somewhere, but would give you an idea of what cancer that looks like, because the portrait, we hope, will look different. And then that would trigger a next more specific test. So we hope this breath test would be done in the GP surgery. Oh. And it would then tell you, OK, you need to go and see a renal specialist or have an endoscopy to look at esophageal changes, for example.
Professor Rebecca Fitzgerald, and before her, a patient, Rebecca Coldrick. Now to Austria, where the country's traditional dress of lederhosen or leather shorts and dirndl or dresses are making a comeback. For many years, such traditional clothes were associated with conservative or even far-right ideology. But as Bethany Bell now reports from Salzburg and Vienna, people are embracing their traditions.
The lederhosen, along with maybe the kilt in Scotland, is probably the only very easily identifiable piece of clothing in Europe, where immediately you can put someone in a particular region.
Daniel Solenyi, who sports an elegant hipster beard, is wearing a dark woolen grey jacket with a high collar, embroidered lederhosen leather shorts, sneakers and long red knitted socks. He dresses like this both at home and at work, at the hotel in Salzburg where he's general manager.
Well, first of all, they're comfy. I like the design, I like the look of them. You can wear them and combine them with multiple outfits. You can wear them with sneakers, you can wear them with a suit and tie. You can really wear them just with anything.
Lederhosen and dirndl dresses are known as Tracht. They're worn in Germany and Austria, especially in the Alps and at beer festivals. But these days, Tracht isn't just for Oktoberfest.
We said we want to wear it on a regular basis, so we started Lederhosen Donnerstag to have a reason to wear it at least once a week.
Christian Eibel has started a new movement in Salzburg called #Lederhosen Donnerstag, Lederhosen Thursday. People wear Tracht every Thursday, wherever they happen to be.
You can clearly see it's a Thursday because people are wearing their Lederhosen or their dirndls. We started a couple of events, like an after-work event kind of style. I love wearing my lederhosen. It clearly shows where I'm coming from, where I belong to. And no matter where I'm in the world, I can wear them in New York and people clearly see, oh, that guy's from Austria. I can wear them in Hawaii, same feeling. And you can't be over or underdressed wearing lederhosen.
For many years, Tracht was associated with conservative or even far-right ideology. But now that's changing.
The political statement that is often associated with wearing lederhosen, I think, is a bit dated. I mean, today we see trends emerging where young people wear lederhosen as a fashion accessory or just because they enjoy wearing them. It is by no means a political statement anymore. Certainly some people will probably feel that way, but I see it on a broader scale, and I feel that it has, those times have gone.
Anita from Vienna, who works for a company that sells tractors and heavy machinery, has dozens of dirndls, each with tight bodices and matching aprons. She says these days bars and discos are more accepting of Tracht.
Now there are all sorts of places where you can go to in a dirndl, which wasn't the case in the past. There used to be discos which wouldn't even let you in if you were wearing a dirndl or lederhosen. Tracht is back, and no matter whether you're a slim or curvy, every woman looks good in a dirndl.
Daniel met his fiancée at an event where they were both wearing lederhosen. He says Tracht is for everyone, wherever you come from.
Rethink what you think you know about lederhosen. If you have a pair of lederhosen, wear them on Thursdays. Just wear them and just enjoy them. Once you put them on, you'll know why we love wearing them so much.
That report by Bethany Bell in Austria. It's a new year, and for the World Service, that means another brand new podcast.
Hello, I'm Steve Crossman. And the moment I stumbled across a dusty box of cassette tapes was the start of a year trying to get to the bottom of a notorious unsolved murder case. Reuben Carter, a boxer known as Hurricane, was tried, convicted, and then released, inspiring a Bob Dylan song and a Hollywood movie along the way. But the full story of the murders has never been told. I've spent the past year tracking down and interviewing almost everyone involved, including many people who've never told their stories. And then there were the tapes. Hours and hours of Reuben Hurricane Carter, never heard before. The result is the Hurricane Tapes, a brand new podcast from the BBC World Service. There's a preview available now if you search The Hurricane Tapes, and the first 2 episodes will be released on January 14th.
India's highest court says a government operation to rescue at least 15 trapped miners has been too slow. The workers became trapped inside an illegal coal mine more than 3 weeks ago. Judges at the Supreme Court questioned the response by the local state government, saying that for those who were trapped, every minute counts. The miners were working inside individual narrow tunnels when the area flooded. Our correspondent Salman Ravi has sent us this report from the mine in the East Jantia Hills.
Operations have now been beefed up with experts from the Coal India arriving and bringing heavy-duty equipment, heavy pumps to deflush the mines. Experts, they are saying that actually the miners, during the course of illegal mining, they might have hit the bed of the river Lenton, which passes nearby the mine. And that is the reason that water, it forced itself into the mine. Some of the workers who were standing on the pit of the mine, or the head of the mine, they got a heavy speed of wind coming towards them and they sensed that there's trouble and they fled from the area. But the 15 people who were there underground, they could not escape. Now the experts, they say that it is actually a race against time, because it was December 13th when these workers, they were trapped, and we are into January in the next year. Locals, they say the efforts of the administration are, however, too little and too late.
Salman Ravi in India. The tech giant Apple says its sales have been slowing and that its earnings in the final part of 2018 will be lower than expected. The firm is blaming economic weakness in China and the trade war between the US and China. Our technology correspondent Theo Leggett explained more about what Apple has been saying.
Apple's chief executive Tim Cook, in his letter to investors, wants to put the blame fairly and squarely on China. He says, while we anticipated some challenges in key emerging markets, we didn't foresee the magnitude of the economic deceleration, particularly in Greater China. But it's a fact that Apple has been existing for many years on the idea of increasing sales of iPhones and increasing prices for iPhones. And over the past few years, what we've seen is that as the volumes of sale increases have gone down, so the prices have gone up, and that's helped Apple's revenues. What it seems is happening now is that consumers are no longer willing to pay ever-increasing prices for products when the actual technology isn't moving on as quickly. So, when Apple first brought out the iPhone, it was a major technological innovation. But you look at the more recent models and what they brought in over and above what had gone before, what consumers were used to, it wasn't that great. And in addition, smartphones generally have become more reliable, they've become better, and people are willing to hang on for them longer. So people are willing to hang on for iPhones for 3 years rather than 2. And that dampens sales as well, because one of the things that Tim Cook himself has pointed to is that iPhone upgrades were not as strong as we thought they would be.
Theo Leggett. For decades, a debate in Spain over whether to exhume the body of the dictator Francisco Franco has divided the country. Today, the government in Madrid has warned the monk in charge of Franco's tomb that he'll not be able to prevent the general from being reburied elsewhere. Our Europe regional editor Mike Sanders told me more about this controversial issue.
Of course, General Franco himself didn't even want to be buried at the Valley of the Fallen. He is the only person who didn't actually die in the Civil War who's buried there. There are some 40,000 people thought to be buried there. Alongside the basilica where his tomb is at present is a monastery. Now, the monastery has control over this tomb, and the prior of this monastery is a chap called Santiago Cantera, and he's the one who's now formally refused the government's request to go in and exhume the body of General Franco to be reburied elsewhere. Now, the next stages are going to be decided in the Supreme Court. General Franco's family wants him buried in Almudena Cathedral in Madrid. Now, Santiago Cantera, this prior, actually officiated at the burial of Franco's only child, his daughter Carmen, about a year ago in the Almudena Cathedral in Madrid. And the family says it's only natural that her father should be buried alongside him. But the government doesn't want that, because it says that if that happens, then the cathedral itself will become a place of pilgrimage for fascists and Falangist supporters of Franco.
How is Franco viewed now in Spain?
Oh, hugely divisive figure. The legacy of the Civil War rumbles on, and for the people on the left, and of course the government is a socialist government or a social democrat government, seen as very much a figure of the old Spain, something they want to get away from. So really want him buried somewhere where he's going to be out of the way and not a figure of pilgrimage.
Mike Sanders. A scientific expedition is making its way through the pack ice of the southern Antarctic Ocean across the Weddell Sea to explore the Larsen C ice shelf. The researchers' main aim is to study the ice shelf from which a 1 trillion-ton iceberg broke off in 2017. On their return journey, scientists using robotic submarines will search for Sir Ernest Shackleton's ship, the Endurance. It was lost during his expedition to Antarctica more than 100 years ago in 1915. Charlotte Connolly from the Scott Polar Research Institute explained what happened to the vessel.
Shackleton's ambition was to take 2 ships, one to either side of the Antarctic, and the one on the far side, on the Ross Sea side, would lay depots towards the South Pole, and then Shackleton would land on the Weddell Sea side and walk towards the South Pole and then carry on and pick up the depot. So he hoped to become the first person to cross Antarctica on foot, except that the Endurance never even made landfall. It got trapped in the ice of the Weddell Sea, and not only that, it got trapped and crushed. So all 28 men on that ship undertook this amazing journey where they took 3 open boats. They camped on the ice as it moved for a while. They took 3 boats, got to an island called Elephant Island, where nobody knew they were, no one was likely to go. And then 6 of those men took a reinforced lifeboat called the James Caird and travelled across the Southern Ocean, the worst ocean in the world, in an open boat, and reached a whaling station at South Georgia, having on the way had to cross a mountain range without mountaineering gear.
She told us why the Endurance hadn't been located earlier.
The reason that it hasn't been found to date is that it's a very challenging area to get to. And of course, the fact that it sank is because it was crushed by the ice, which gives an impression of the state of the sea ice in the region. So it's certainly not a certainty at all. The expectation is that if they can find it, it's in a relatively good condition. It's in very cold water. There's not an awful lot, they don't think, of biological life around there. And they've done some geology. They think at most it'll be covered in maybe a few centimetres of sort of sedimentary deposit. But yeah, getting to it is really the challenge.
Charlotte Connolly. And now to South Africa and a 10-year-old boy who can do huge sums in his head. Sibali Zwane's mathematical genius has gone down a storm on social media. Pamza Falani went to meet him.
Welcome to Maths.
Class is in session. At this farm school, the pupils are hard at work, perfecting their maths skills. But there's one who stands out. Meet maths whiz Sibahle Zwane. Called the human calculator, he's just 10 years old.
Anyone who knows the answer? Sibahle? 540.
I'm the best at maths in the whole school. When people see me, they ask me to do sums for them to test how good I am. And they are surprised when I get the answers right. Some people even give me money for doing difficult numbers. I give that money to my mother, and that makes me happy.
He was discovered when a local policeman filmed him.
250 times 11.
2,750. At home, his mother may not be able to help him with his homework, but she is his biggest fan.
He always dream big most of the time. With me, I wish him everything that could go well for him. I want him to explore, he loves challenges.
78. And so we put him to the test. Times 550.
42,900,000.
What? How did your brain do that? After a professional assessment, he's deemed a gifted child. But that brings other challenges. He becomes bored easily and needs unconventional teaching methods in order to thrive.
5 times 1.
Professor Belinda Huntley runs the Wits Siyanqoba Maths Olympiad program and wants Sibahle to join her class and compete with some of the best minds in the world.
If he isn't enriched now, he's just going to dissolve into the rest of the masses, where he's just going to be expected just to keep up with the curriculum.
And now admitted to the Geniuses program, young Sibahle finally has a chance at a bright future.
That report by Pamza Falani in South Africa. And that's it from us for now, but there'll be an updated version of the Global News podcast later. If you want to comment on this podcast or the topics covered in it, you can send us an email. The address is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. I'm Valerie Sanderson. Until next time, bye-bye.